Iron Man 2 is the third movie in the MCU after the first Iron Man movie and the Incredible Hulk, and is the next in this ongoing series of videos, which are lookbacks on the earlier phases of the MCU. It's so interesting going back to these movies and to look back on the memories that they've created, especially when you consider the grander scheme of the MCU ever since. But in that point of time, none of that was really the case. At that point, you just wanted to see a really fun comic book movie, something that would do those characters justice. I remember being pumped out of my mind to see this movie. I was counting down the days to it pretty much. And Iron Man 2, when I went to go see it, I walked out of it and had an opinion that I think most people did, in that it was a movie with some great moments and there was some enjoyment to be had, definitely, but it was also a significant step down from the first one. It's not nearly as good as the first Iron Man movie. That is something that is been made abundantly clear over the years as well. It's not necessarily among my favorite MCU movies either. It is quite low when it comes to the ranking overall. But when it comes to some of the things that are there to enjoy about it, there are a lot of things that I enjoy about it. And I also have some interesting personal things when it comes to Iron Man 2, which were just fun anecdotes I wanted to share. Around the time the movie was coming out, I was getting a lot more into music. And so I was getting into rock especially, and a lot of metal, and eventually I got into AC/DC. And at the time this movie came out, there was an album that dropped with it, which was full of AC/DC songs. And I remember listening to that album over and over again. It was just a really cool greatest hits compilation. Some of their greatest hits were on there, like Shoot to Thrill, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, Thunderstruck. But there were also some underrated things in there, like Let There Be Rock, The Razor's Edge. And so to just get an assortment of all of those and listen to those was a lot of fun. I still have that album with me, and even now I listen to it, and I guess I credit it to, further expanding my musical journey. You never know how it's gonna happen, right? The other thing is, Iron Man 2 is the first movie I ever owned on Blu-ray. At the time, we had just made that jump. Blu-ray had existed for a couple of years already. I think some of the landmark movies were like Spider-Man 3 and stuff. But we finally got a player in 2010. And the first movie that we bought with it on Blu-ray was Iron Man 2. Do you have any idea how crazy it was to see a jump from like 480p or 576p to something that was double that? It blew our collective minds. It was like witnessing this third eye open or something like that. It was like the second coming of Christ. And it was this amazing experience just getting to see a movie in that 1080p resolution. Obviously now there is something that is 4 times that clarity with 4K, but it's just an interesting thing to look back on, that Iron Man 2 was the starting point for that in our household. As it stands, like I said, I don't think it's as good as the first one, but there were still things that I enjoyed about it. In fact, I just rewatched it for this particular breakdown, and once again, I really enjoyed the action of Iron Man 2. This is something that the first movie excelled at, and I think Jon Favreau did a good job of directing those sequences. And once again, there are standout moments in Iron Man 2 that, deserve to be highlighted. One in particular being the Grand Prix sequence, which is somewhat the movie's peak, and it's the thing that is constantly brought up when it's talked about. It was also featured on a ton of marketing, promotional material as well. The posters showed little snippets of it over here and there. Also, the IMAX poster had the Mark V armor, which was the one that Tony wears in that scene. It makes sense to have that be the major promotional point of the movie. It's the part which is the most intensely directed. It's visually very cool, and it definitely puts Tony in a situation where it feels like he might not be able to get out of it without a few scratches. And I like how they did that. There's also a really great scene towards the end where Iron Man and War Machine, Rhodey's in that suit, they have to take on a bunch of drones, and this is happening in this courtyard, and the sequence is wonderfully executed. This was apparently storyboarded by the man who made Samurai Jack. And you can kind of tell because in an animation setting, it feels like it would play out something like this. There is this level of chaos to it, but it's so organized in some ways just to see all the carnage going down. I don't think it's as great as the Grand Prix scene, but it is the next best thing to that. There's not a ton of action in Iron Man 2. A lot of it deals with Tony going through a lot of personal and even public stuff as the identity that he has been revealed to the world. There are 2 things he's specifically specifically dealing with? For one, he is dealing with the government who wants the Iron Man technology to militarize it in some way, and that's not something that Tony is on board with, even though there seem to be knockoffs around the world trying to replicate it. But as that's happening, it seems like they're far away, so there's no threat to worry about. He does, however, have to deal with the fact that the arc reactor in his chest is poisoning him due to the palladium that's powering it. And unless he can find another element, it's going to completely contaminate his blood and it's going to kill him. And that's something that he has to deal with. The irony of the situation that the device that's keeping him alive is also going to end him. And so it's also leading him to make decisions that feel like these last, things, last grand gestures that may or may not be as great as they look in theory, but they might work out well. One of the decisions he makes, which works out nicely, is that he elects Pepper as the CEO of Stark Industries. And as she starts to get to work, she has to deal with a lot of PR messes while also trying to deal with the Stark Expo that is going on. And so there are a lot of moments with her in this one, and Gwyneth Paltrow is once again really good. And she gets an assistant in this named Natalie Rushman. Now, obviously, we know that that's actually Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow. And I think Scarlett Johansson is one of those castings that is just as good as it gets for that character. I don't think, in retrospect, you could have picked anybody else to play this role but her. And she does an excellent job, and she is a standout throughout the movie. Eventually, when her identity is revealed and she gets more involved with the movie's proceedings, she is a big part of the finale where she helps take out a bunch of bad guys at this facility run by Justin Hammer, and is her first big action sequence, kind of giving you a taste of what her character is capable of and what she can bring to the Avengers down the line. And this movie also acts as an Avengers setup in a lot of ways, with a more prominent role with Nick Fury, once again played by Samuel L. Jackson, who is a lot of fun in this movie. He actually helps Tony unlock a lot more when it comes to finding that new element. He's got materials from Howard Stark from many years ago. And something that I really like here is how Tony manages to reconcile with his dad even though he's no longer with him. There is that distance that was there emotionally. He never really knew if his dad really loved him or not. And so to see that connection sort of formed with the archival footage that he finds, and then eventually discovering that the model for the Stark Expo from 1974 might have some code in there that could be synthesized with modern technology, he manages to find a connection to his dad. It leads to a line from Tony that I really love.
Dead for almost 20 years. Still taking me to school.
Why do I love that line? Because it's the kind of thing that you say whenever you've, been inspired by someone along the way. You always feel like the lessons are over after a certain while. But it never really is. Like, something someone says or does from a long time ago will click at some point, and it just manages to have this profound effect. And I like how the movie dealt with that. Where Iron Man 2 doesn't succeed as well is with everything surrounding the threats that Tony is facing. For example, Ivan Vanko, played by Mickey Rourke, who is good in the movie for a while, and as Whiplash, he's great, especially in that Grand Prix sequence. There is a threat level to him that is established very well. And there is a proper motivation to what he's doing as well. His father, Anton Vanko, used to work with Howard Stark, and they created the blueprints for the arc reactor. This eventually leads him to make his own in this really cool opening credit sequence in the movie. And eventually, when he uses that to power these electric whips that he has, and he's taking out the cars at the Grand Prix, it's very clear that those knockoffs are no longer just some cheap nonsense in other countries. Someone else clearly has that tech and could use it for evil. And so the call to get the armors over to the government become even louder. But after losing that first confrontation with Tony, he's out of the game for a bit. And there's a jailbreak situation of sorts that is orchestrated by Hammer to try and get Vanko out of there, so Vanko is presumed dead for a while. So he's working at Hammer Industries for the most part, then for the rest of the movie, sort of working in the shadows. And I don't feel like he remains a credible threat after that, and he's not as memorable as a result. As for Justin Hammer, I like Sam Rockwell in the role of Hammer, but his entire plotline to overthrow what Stark has built and eventually to try and, make him look obsolete at the expo, working with Vanko, I just didn't find that as compelling. And then Ivan changing his plans around, going from suits to drones, is eventually something that Hammer just has to go along with, and eventually those are unveiled at the expo. There is something interesting over there when it comes to, like, real life parallels, especially when it comes to the use of drones in the military and the, potential relies with the use of drones. So I guess there's some things over there, but they're not developed enough to be able to get that kind of, discussion going around it. And that's also something that does affect the movie. There was a sense of focus to the first one, and there's a sense of tension that felt a little more tangible and real that I feel like this doesn't always get the time to hone in on. I also liked Rhodey in the movie. Don Cheadle replaces Terrence Howard from this point on for good, and he's very good over here. And eventually he confronts Tony because he's like, well, I've been trying to tell everybody that you're not going to misuse the armor, but I just saw you at your birthday party trying that, so I'm going to teach you a lesson. They eventually get into a fight, and Rhodey gets away with the Mark II armor, and that is modded into the War Machine armor. And so the two of them reluctantly then have to then team up to reconcile their friendship and take out Vanko once and for all. And there's a maneuver that they pull in the mansion fight, which involves the repulsors connecting and blowing up the place, that eventually helps stop Vanko. So I guess in some ways those parallels do work out, but like I said, so much is happening in Iron Man 2 at times that some of those beats do feel very quick. Eventually Tony finding that new element with the particle accelerator that he builds in his own mansion, and then building the Mark 6 out of it, the triangle armor chest piece, like that was something that is very iconic when it comes to Iron Man, seeing that triangle. So I like the fact that the film managed to have that in here as well. Overall, when it comes to Iron Man 2, I don't think it's the strongest movie in the MCU, but there are things that I do enjoy about it, and I don't necessarily hate the movie. And I do think that when it does work, it works really well. I just wish it had a lot more time to make some of those ideas and things that I wanted to play around with work a lot better. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more videos very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.